Hey, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping into a question that's about as human as it gets. What makes someone hot? We're going to break down this huge debate that pits our ancient, hardwired instincts against, well, the world we live in right now.
So really, it all boils down to this, right? Is our idea of beauty something that's been baked into our DNA for thousands of years? Like an evolutionary cheat sheet for picking a good mate? Or is it something we just kind of make up? Something shaped by our culture, by our movies, by our Instagram feeds? People have been wrestling with this for ages. And honestly, the debate is more intense now than ever.
All right, so here's the game plan for how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at the case for that biological blueprint. Then, we're going to get into the major pushback against that whole idea. After that, we'll dive into some pretty startling data about how men and women rate each other. And finally, we'll try to unpack the two completely different reasons why that might be happening. Okay, first up, let's talk about the evolutionary psychology angle. The core idea here is that our attractions aren't just random whims. Nope. They're the result of these powerful, ancient drives that helped our ancestors survive, thrive, and make more ancestors. Now get this. A key piece of evidence for this view is this number, 0.6. That's the correlation between a guy's socioeconomic status and how attractive women find him. And let me tell you, in the world of social sciences, a 0.6 correlation is huge. But here's the kicker. What's the same correlation for men rating women? It's zero. A flat zero. I mean, that's a wild difference. Now, here's a really fascinating concept that comes out of this biological viewpoint. It's a word you might not have heard, neoteny. All it means is keeping youthful, almost baby-like features, even when you're an adult. Think about it. The things we often find cute, like big eyes, a small nose, a symmetrical face. Proponents of this theory say that's not just a passing fad. It's a deep biological signal of youth and health. And, it goes way beyond just neoteny. This perspective points to a whole list of things that are seen as universally attractive, because at the end of the day, they signal health and fertility, or fecundity, which is really just the ability to have kids. So we're talking about things like facial symmetry, obvious signs of youth, even rosy skin that shows you've got good circulation, all seen as these ancient, reliable clues for a good reproductive partner. But hold on, that neat and tidy biological blueprint, it is far from the final word. There's a really powerful critique that argues this whole way of thinking is just deeply flawed when you try to apply it to how we live today. And we're not talking about a subtle disagreement here. The challenge is pretty stark. Critics argue that when you use this field to explain modern relationships, it has, and this is a direct quote from one of the sources, almost no intellectual merit. Whoa. The basic idea is that it's like trying to use a map from the Stone Age to navigate New York City. The world has just changed too much. And this slide just perfectly sums up a huge part of the critique, which is basically an accusation of confirmation bias. The argument is that the studies are kind of designed to find what they're already looking for. So they'll ask women tons of questions about a man's wealth, his job, stuff that they frame as competence. But what do they conveniently forget to ask about? Purely physical things that women might actually find hot, like a guy's height, his build, things that don't neatly fit the theory. Okay, so this brings us to a real flashpoint in the debate. We're talking about a piece of data that both sides point to, and it reveals a pretty shocking difference in how men and women seem to be sizing each other up. Just take a look at this. According to data that gets cited a lot in this debate, men rate about 50% of women as below average in attractiveness. Okay, that's pretty much what you'd expect statistically, right? A normal distribution. But then look at the other bar. Women rate a staggering 80% of men as below average. That's not a small gap. That is a canyon. And if you've ever spent 5 minutes on a dating app, this probably feels eerily familiar. Something is clearly going on.
So why? What on earth could explain this so-called 80% rule? How is that massive disparity even possible? Well, as you might have guessed, the two sides in this debate have completely different explanations.
The evolutionary argument brings it all back to biology. It claims this extreme selectivity in women is a survival mechanism, meant to counteract what it calls the differential burden of reproduction. To put it simply, because the biological cost and risk of having a baby is so much higher for women, they have literally evolved to be much, much choosing. And this unequal investment, they argue, starts at the most basic level. I mean, an egg is thousands of times larger than a sperm cell. From there, you add the 9-month pregnancy, the physical demands of caring for an infant, and the very real economic risks that single mothers often face. So the theory goes that this has created a powerful instinctual drive for women to select only the most competent partners.
But the rebuttal to all of that is simple and direct. This whole line of thinking is just obsolete. The argument from the other side is that this view is completely out of date, and it's trying to explain 21st century behavior with prehistoric logic. In a world with reliable contraception, changing family structures, and more economic independence for women, they argue that this differential burden just isn't the main driver anymore.
So ultimately, what we have are two completely opposed ways of looking at this. You've got evolutionary psychology, which sees our desires as these ancient echoes of survival strategies, all hardwired into our biology. And then you have the critique, which sees that entire field as a biased, outdated story that totally fails to explain the complex reality of attraction in our modern world. And that leaves us right here with this final crucial question. In our world of dating apps, swiping right, shifting social norms, how much of our deepest attractions are still being guided by that ancient blueprint? And how much of this story are we now writing for ourselves? That, right there, is the debate at the very heart of human desire.